Welcome back to A&Q, a series where we answer some of your big questions about life. And often we see that leads to more questions and then more answers and then more questions. And so you get how that goes. Today's topic is one that a lot of us are asking because statistically speaking, almost everyone is affected by this in one way or another. What does the Bible say about divorce? Now, in the Old Testament, there's a book called Deuteronomy that talks about divorce, and in the New Testament, both Jesus and the Apostle Paul talk about it. And we'll list those passages in the show notes, but for the sake of time, let's look at what Jesus says. Now, in Matthew 19, Jesus is clear that from the beginning, marriage was designed to be permanent. But Moses allowed for divorce because of what Jesus calls hardness of hearts. What's interesting is that in this passage, the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders at the time, they're trying to trap Jesus. At this time, there was a big debate going on over the interpretation of one word that we find in Deuteronomy chapter 24. It says, when a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house. And we can stop there because the debate really centered around how to interpret the word indecency. You see, there were two schools of thought at the time. One interpreted indecency narrowly so that it meant something egregious like having an affair. The other school had a much broader interpretation, and in some writings we even see that it said something as trivial as burning the man's food was plausible grounds for divorce. So this was the cultural debate going on at the time, and the religious leaders thought that they could trap Jesus, which, by the way, never works. Now, Jesus does weigh in, and he sides with the narrower interpretation of this. He is clearly against the idea of divorcing for just any superficial reason. Both here and in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says that sexual immorality is viable grounds for divorce. Now, also later in the New Testament, Paul talks about abandonment, and we can also look at behavior such as abuse that breaks this covenant of marriage. All of those behaviors are legitimate grounds for divorce. But the part that stands out to me is the reason why Jesus says that Moses allowed divorce. Do you remember that? Because of the hardness of hearts. And it might be tempting to think that Jesus was just talking to those people, or maybe even simply he was talking to the Pharisees. However, I think it would be quite arrogant of us to think that it was just those people back then. They were the ones that had the hardened hearts. I don't need to give examples, do I? I know my heart has been hardened from time to time, and I don't think I'm the only one. You see, God's standard for marriage hasn't changed. And sadly, the brokenness of his people hasn't changed either. And because of that, as long as we live in a sinful world with highly imperfect people, divorce will be part of this broken reality. But let's remember that sin and brokenness do not have the last word in God's story. Our faithful God can redeem anything. I've seen it firsthand. I know stories that will bring you to your knees in awe and worship because God had restored the unrestorable and brought seemingly dead marriages back to life. And that's the remarkable thing about our God. He is bringing restoration and reconciliation to a good yet broken world. And it means that there will always be truth, there will always be love, and there will always be hope when we look to him. Now, as we said, this probably sparked more questions, so post those in the comment section and our team will come back to those maybe in some future videos. Subscribe, and if you found this helpful, share it with others who can join on this journey with us. We'll see you next time.